The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time, and it changed everything. Hana was sitting in her office on the 42nd floor of the Terran Diplomatic Tower in Seoul, when her assistant walked in with a pale face and a datapad held out like it was something dangerous. Hana took it, read the first 3 lines, and set her coffee down very slowly. Earth had been summoned to stand trial before the Galactic Concord. The charges were serious. 27 violations of the Unified Laws of Sanctioned Combat, commonly known as the ULSC. These were the ancient rules that every spacefaring civilization in the known galaxy had followed for over 10,000 years. Every species that had ever gone to war in the stars had done so under these laws. They were considered sacred, unbreakable, and older than most civilizations that still existed. Earth had apparently broken all of them. Hana read the full document twice. Then she called Han Do-yu. Do-yu was not a man who panicked easily. He had spent 30 years in the Terran Defense Corps, rising from a young recruit on a colony station to the position of chief military strategist for all of Earth's armed forces. He had gray hair, calm eyes, and a voice that never rose above a conversational tone, even when he was ordering a fleet into battle. When Hana told him what had happened, he was quiet for a long moment, and then said, "Read me the list." She did. The charges came from the Korath Dominion, a large and aggressive reptilian empire that had tried to take 3 human colony worlds 6 months ago. The war had lasted 11 days. Earth had won. The Korath had not taken it well. Their admiral, a warlord named Drenoska, had gone to the Galactic Concord and filed a formal complaint. He claimed that Earth had cheated. He claimed that every tactic the humans used was illegal under galactic law. And he wanted the Concord to declare Earth's victory invalid, demand the return of the colony worlds, and punish humanity with sanctions that could cut them off from all galactic trade and technology. Hana finished reading and waited. Do-yu said, "Set up a meeting with the council, tonight." The meeting happened in a secure room beneath the diplomatic tower. Hana stood at the front, with the datapad projected on a large screen. Around the table sat the 7 members of the Terran Council, the people who made decisions for all of humanity's interests beyond Earth's atmosphere. Among them was Kwon Tae-sun, a former soldier who had become a scholar of war. He was old now, with deep lines on his face and hands that shook slightly when he held his tea. But his mind was still the sharpest in the room. Hana explained the situation clearly. The Concord was not asking Earth to attend. Refusal would be taken as an admission of guilt, and the sanctions would be applied automatically. If Earth wanted to defend itself, it had to send a delegation to the neutral station called Aethys Prime, located in orbit around a dead star at the edge of known space. Tae-sun listened carefully and then spoke. "The galaxy does not care that we won," he said. "They care that we did not follow their rules while doing it. In their eyes, an illegal victory is worse than an honorable defeat. We need to understand that before we walk into that room." One of the younger council members asked the obvious question. "But we never signed their laws. How can they charge us with breaking rules we never agreed to?" Tae-sun smiled a thin smile. "That is exactly the argument we will need to make. But it will not be enough on its own. They will say the ULSC applies to all spacefaring species by default. They will say ignorance is not a defense. We need something more." Do-yu, who had been silent through most of the meeting, finally spoke. "We have something more," he said, "but we will need time to prepare it." He did not explain further, and no one pressed him. They had all learned long ago that Do-yu revealed his plans when they were ready, and not a moment before. Compared to the elder species, humans were still newcomers to the stars. Most civilizations had been traveling between worlds for thousands of years. Humanity had barely been doing it for 2 centuries. On the 3rd night of travel, Hana found Taesun sitting alone in the observation lounge, staring at the streaking lights of compressed space outside the window. She sat down beside him. "Do you think we can win this?" she asked. Taesun considered the question for a while. "Win is the wrong word," he said. "They are not interested in fairness. They are interested in order. The ULSC exists because it makes war predictable. It makes outcomes controllable. A species that fights outside those rules is not just a lawbreaker. It is a threat to the entire system. So what do? We show them that their system was never as just as they believed it to be, and we offer them something better. Or we fail, and Earth becomes very lonely in a very large galaxy." Hana let that thought sit in the silence between them. On the fourth day, the steady flame dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and Aethys Prime appeared on the view screen. It was enormous, a station built from the bones of old ships and ancient metals, spinning slowly around a star that had burned out 1,000,000 years ago. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species were already docked along its arms. Hana stood on the bridge and looked at it. Somewhere inside that station, the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy were waiting to judge humanity. They had already made up their minds. She could feel it. Behind her, Doyu stepped forward and stood at her shoulder. He looked at the station with calm, steady eyes. "Let them read the charges," he said quietly. "Then we will read them ours." Hana nodded, straightened her jacket, and gave the order to dock. The Grand Tribunal Chamber of Aethys Prime was built to make anyone standing in it feel small. The ceiling rose so high, it disappeared into shadow. The walls were lined with carved stone from a dozen dead worlds, each piece older than human civilization itself. Seats rose in steep tiers on all sides, filled with representatives of species that had been traveling the stars when humans were still learning to farm. Hana walked into this room with her back straight and her face calm. Behind her came Han Doyu, Kwon Tae-sun, and Captain Park Ji-suk, who kept his eyes moving across the chamber the way a soldier does when entering unknown ground. The rest of their security detail waited outside. Only 4 humans were permitted inside. The chamber was full. Hana could see species she recognized, and many she did not. Tall, thin beings with skin like polished metal. Short, heavy creatures with 4 arms and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. A cluster of floating organisms that communicated through pulses of color. All of them were watching the humans, some with curiosity, most with something colder. At the highest point of the chamber sat Loth Veon, the High Arbiter of the Galactic Concord. Veon was Malith, a species that resembled enormous insects, with long, elegant limbs and compound eyes that reflected light like dark jewels. The Malith were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, and had served as arbiters for thousands of years. Veon's voice, when it spoke, was translated through a device that turned its clicking language into smooth, clear words. "The Galactic Concord recognizes the delegation from Earth," Veon said. "You are here to answer charges brought against your species by the Korath Dominion. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings?" Hana stepped forward to the speaking platform. "We understand," she said. "Then we will hear the charges." Dren Oska rose from the Korath section of the chamber. He was massive, even for his species. The Korath were reptilian, built like armored walls, with thick scales and jaws that could crush metal. Oska had been the fleet admiral who led the invasion of the human colonies. He had lost. The scars on his face suggested he had barely survived. He walked to the center of the chamber floor, and when he spoke, his voice filled the room like a deep drum. 6 months ago, Oska began, the Korath Dominion engaged the human species in lawful military conflict over territorial rights in the Verath Corridor. We assembled our fleet according to the unified laws of sanctioned combat. We declared our formation. We identified our vessels. We followed every rule that has governed warfare in this galaxy for 10,000 years. He paused and looked directly at Hana. The humans did none of these things. He raised a datapad and began listing the violations. Each one was projected on a massive screen behind him for the entire chamber to see. Article 4. Combatants must perceive each other clearly during engagement. The humans had deployed electronic warfare systems that blinded Korath's sensors. They had filled entire sectors with false signals, ghost ships that did not exist, making it impossible to tell which targets were real. Article 7. Fleets must declare their formation before engagement begins. The humans had hidden their ships inside asteroid fields, behind moons, and within the rings of gas giants. They had refused to announce their positions. They had attacked from places the Korath did not even think to look. Article 12. Only crewed vessels may deliver lethal force. The humans had sent swarms of autonomous drones into battle. Thousands of small, fast, unmanned machines that carried weapons and attacked without any living being on board. Article 19. Support vessels are sovereign neutral and may not be targeted. The humans had destroyed Korath's supply ships, fuel carriers, and repair stations. They had attacked the things that kept the Korath fleet alive, rather than the fleet itself. Article 22. Communication during combat must be truthful. The humans had broadcast false surrender signals. They had sent fake retreat messages. They had played audio recordings of Korath distress calls to confuse and frighten enemy crews. With each charge, the chamber grew quieter. Hana could feel the mood shifting. What had started as curiosity was becoming something closer to horror. These species had fought wars for thousands of years, and they had all followed the same rules. They were the foundation of galactic civilization, and the humans had treated them like they did not exist. Asuka finished his list and let the silence hold for a long moment. Then he said, "The humans did not fight a war. They committed acts of organized deception, cruelty, and cowardice. They won not through strength or honor, but through trickery and the violation of every principle this Concord was built to protect." He turned to face the High Arbiter. "We demand that Earth's victory be declared illegitimate. We demand reparations, and we demand that the human species be sanctioned until they learn to wage war like civilized beings." He sat down. The chamber buzzed with low, anxious conversation in 100 different languages. Vayon raised one long limb, and the room fell silent. The compound eyes turned toward Hana. "The delegation from Earth may respond. How does your species plead to these charges?" Hana stood very still for a moment. She could feel Doyu's calm presence behind her. She could feel Taesun's steady gaze. She could feel Jisok's tension, the soldier's instinct to fight back hard and fast. She stepped forward and spoke clearly. "Earth does not plead," she said. "Earth was never a signatory to the unified laws of sanctioned combat. We did not sign them. We did not agree to them. We were not consulted when they were written. These laws do not apply to us." The chamber erupted. Dozens of species began speaking at once. Some were angry, some were confused. A few, Hana noticed, were very quiet and very thoughtful. Vayon restored order with a sharp clicking sound that cut through the noise. "The tribunal will consider Earth's position," Vayon said. "This session is adjourned until the human delegation can prepare a formal legal response. You have 2 days." As the chamber emptied, a figure approached Hana near the exit. She was Pelari, a species that looked almost human except for their silver-white skin and slightly too large eyes. Her name was Sayla Finn, and she introduced herself as a neutral trade observer. "Ambassador Yoon," Finn said quietly, leaning close, "I want you to know something. The last species that defied the Concord's combat laws was the Dreth. That was 3,000 years ago." Hana waited. "They no longer exist," Finn said. "The Concord sanctioned them, cut off their trade, blocked their access to fuel and technology. Within 200 years, their civilization collapsed. They are remembered only as a warning. Hana met her gaze steadily. I appreciate the warning, she said, but we are not the Dreth. Finn studied her face for a moment. I hope not, she said, and walked away. Hana watched her go, then turned back to her team. Doyu was already moving toward the door, his mind clearly working on whatever plan he had been building since Seoul. Taesun walked beside her, his old hands clasped behind his back. 2 days, Hana said. Taesun nodded. That is enough. Jisok fell into step behind them, his hand resting near his sidearm out of habit, his eyes still scanning every corridor they passed through. He said nothing, but Hana noticed that his jaw was set hard, the way it got before a fight, and she understood. They were all feeling the same thing. The galaxy had decided that humans were criminals. Now they had 2 days to prove that the real crime was the law itself. The night before Earth's formal response, Kwon Taesun did not sleep. He sat in the small quarters assigned to the human delegation on Aethys Prime and wrote. He had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone knew. The document he was finishing had been in progress for years, born from a lifetime of studying war, its history, its cost, and the lies civilizations told themselves about it. Han Do-yu came to check on him near midnight, station time. He found Taesun surrounded by holographic projections of old Earth battles, casualty reports from the Korath War, and a single handwritten page that contained what Taesun called the core truth. Is it ready? Do-yu asked. Taesun looked up with tired but sharp eyes. It has been ready since the day I watched my first platoon die on a colony world, because Command wanted an honorable frontal assault instead of the flanking maneuver that would have saved them. I just needed the right audience. The next morning, the Grand Tribunal chamber was even more crowded than before. Word had spread across the station that the humans were going to speak, and species that had not attended the first session now filled every seat. Hana noticed that the mood was different, less hostile, more curious. The galaxy wanted to know what humans would say when cornered. Yoon Hana walked to the speaking platform and did not smile. She carried a single data pad and nothing else. Behind her, Do-yu and Taesun sat in the delegation seats. Captain Park Ji-se stood by the door, watching. High Arbiter, Hana began. Members of the Concord, 2 days ago you heard the Korath Dominion accuse Earth of violating the unified laws of sanctioned combat. You heard them call us criminals, cowards, and uncivilized. Today I am not here to deny what we did. Everything Admiral Asuka described is true. We used electronic warfare. We hid in asteroid fields. We attacked supply lines. We broadcast false signals. We did all of it. A ripple of shock moved through the chamber. Several delegations exchanged confused glances. This was not a defense. This sounded like a confession. Hana continued. We did all of it because it was the right thing to do. She lifted the datapad and projected a document onto the chamber's central screen. It was written in clean, simple language, and its title was displayed in the 3 most common galactic trade languages, as well as Korean and English. This is the Terran Doctrine of Armed Conflict, Hana said. It is the law that governs how Earth fights its wars. It was written by our own people, based on our own history, and it was ratified by the Terran Council as the binding legal framework for all human military operations. She began to read its core principles. The first principle stated that war is not a ceremony or a performance. It is a failure of all other options, and because it is a failure, it must be ended as quickly as possible. Any tactic that shortens a war and reduces total death on both sides is not only permitted but required. The second principle stated that the protection of civilians is absolute and unconditional. No civilian target may ever be struck, No civilian population may ever be used as a shield or a bargaining tool. But military targets carry no such protection. If it wears a uniform, carries a weapon, or supports the enemy's ability to fight, it is a legal target. The third principle stated that deception in warfare is not a crime. It is a duty. If a false retreat saves 1,000 lives, then honesty is the greater evil. If sensor jamming prevents a battle from happening at all, then clarity is the enemy of peace. The fourth principle stated that autonomous weapon systems are permitted when they reduce the risk to living soldiers. A drone that can be destroyed carries no grieving family. A machine that fights in place of a person is not cowardice. It is mercy. Hana paused to let the words settle. The chamber was completely silent. Then she changed the screen to show two sets of numbers. On the left, the actual casualty figures from the Korath War as it had been fought under human tactics. On the right, a projection calculated by Terran military analysts showing what the casualties would have been if the war had been fought under ULSC rules. The real numbers read, Earth lost 4,200 soldiers. The Korath lost 11,000. The projected numbers under ULSC rules read, Earth would have lost approximately 140,000. The Korath would have lost approximately 180,000. Over 300,000 lives, saved because Earth fought dirty. Hana let the numbers stay on the screen. She watched the faces of the delegates. She saw mathematics doing what words could not. She saw horror, not at what humans had done, but at what the alternative would have cost. Your laws, Hana said, looking at the chamber, require fleets to face each other openly. They require ships to announce their positions. They require only crewed vessels to fight. They forbid targeting supply lines. They forbid deception. She paused. In other words, your laws require the maximum number of living beings to be placed in danger for the maximum amount of time. Your laws do not minimize death. They organize it. They make it neat, predictable, and endless. She turned to face Dren Osta directly. The Korath admiral stared back at her with hard, unreadable eyes. Admiral Oska, she said, your fleet outnumbered ours 15-1. Under your laws you would have won. Under your laws you would have ground our colonies into dust through sheer numbers, and the Concord would have called it a lawful victory. 140,000 of our people would be dead. 180,000 of yours would be dead. And the galaxy would have shrugged and called it honorable. She turned back to the Arbiter. We chose differently. We chose to fight in a way that ended the war in 11 days instead of 11 months. We chose tactics that kept our people alive, and whether the Korath want to admit it or not, kept more of their people alive too. We did not fight for honor. We fought for survival. And if that is a crime in this galaxy, then this galaxy needs better laws. She placed the datapad on the speaking platform. The Terran doctrine of armed conflict is now formally submitted to the tribunal as evidence that Earth did not fight without law. We fought under our own law, a law built not on tradition or ritual, but on a single, simple idea. She looked up at the tiers of watching faces. That the purpose of the rules of war is not to make war beautiful. It is to make war as short and as survivable as possible. She stepped back from the platform. The silence lasted for a long time. It was the kind of silence that happens when something in a room has changed, and everyone can feel it, but no one knows what to say yet. Then, from somewhere in the upper tiers, a single delegate from a small species Hana did not recognize began to tap their limb against the stone railing. It was a slow, rhythmic sound. Others joined. Not applause exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition. The sound spread across the chamber like rain on a metal roof, growing louder, until Vion raised a limb for silence. The High Arbiter looked at Hana for a long moment. The tribunal will recess to consider Earth's submission, Vion said. The voice was neutral, but Hana thought she saw something shift in those dark compound eyes, something that might have been doubt. Not doubt about Earth, but doubt about everything else. As the chamber emptied, Doyu fell into step beside Hana. He did not speak for several seconds. Then he said quietly, "That was the best thing I have ever seen anyone do with words." Hana let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "It is not over," she said. "No," Doyu agreed, "but they are listening now, and that is something they were not doing before." Behind them, Taesun walked slowly, his old legs tired, but his eyes bright. He had spent his whole life trying to make people understand that the rules of war should serve the living, not the dead. Today, for the first time, a room full of alien civilizations had heard that idea and had not laughed. It was not victory, but it was the sound before victory, and Taesun knew that sound well enough to recognize it. The hours after Hana's speech were dangerous, not in the loud, obvious way that wars are dangerous, but in the quiet, invisible way that politics can kill just as effectively. The galactic concord was fracturing. Representatives from dozens of species were meeting in private rooms across Aethys Prime, and the conversations were not calm. The large, powerful empires were furious. The smaller, weaker species were whispering. And somewhere in between, the future of Earth's place in the galaxy was being decided by beings who had never set foot on its soil. Dren Oska moved fast. Within hours of the tribunal's recess, he was meeting with the delegations of the three most powerful species in the Concord, the Malith, the Veshari, and the Torvan. His argument was simple and effective. If the Concord accepted Earth's doctrine, if it allowed a species to fight outside the ULSC and face no consequences, then the entire system would collapse. Every species, with a grudge and a fleet, would abandon the rules. War would become chaos. The 10,000 years of structured, controlled conflict that had kept the galaxy from tearing itself apart would end overnight. The humans do not bring a better law, Oska told anyone who would listen. They bring no law at all. They dress up savagery in moral language and call it progress. If you reward them for this, you invite every barbaric species in the galaxy to do the same. He was not entirely wrong, and that was what made him dangerous. Meanwhile, Hana was dealing with a different kind of attention. Delegations from smaller species had begun approaching the human quarters on the station. They came quietly, often sending low-ranking officials rather than ambassadors, and they all asked the same thing. Could they have a copy of the Terran doctrine of armed conflict? These were species that had suffered under the ULSC for centuries. Species whose fleets were small, whose populations were limited, and who could never win a war of open, declared formations against a larger enemy. The ULSC's rules, which demanded that fleets face each other openly and honestly, had always favored the biggest, the strongest, the most numerous. For small species, the laws of sanctioned combat were not protection. They were a death sentence written in polite language. Hana gave them the copies. Doyu approved it without hesitation. "Let the ideas spread," he said. "Ideas are harder to sanction than ships." But the spreading idea also made them a target. On the second night after the speech, Park Ji-suk was standing outside the human delegation's quarters when he heard something wrong. It was not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The station had a constant background hum of ventilation, power systems, and distant machinery. In the corridor leading to the human quarters, a section of that hum had gone dead. Someone had disabled the local sensor grid. Ji-suk moved without thinking. He sent a silent alert to his security team through his wrist device and drew his sidearm. He pressed himself against the wall and waited. They came around the corner 30 seconds later. 3 Korath operatives, moving fast and low, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying military-grade cutting tools and short-range energy weapons. They were heading for the door to Hana's quarters. Jisok stepped out of the shadows and put himself between them and the door. What happened next took less than 10 seconds. The lead operative lunged. Jisok sidestepped, caught the arm, and broke it at the joint with a sharp, efficient twist. The second operative raised a weapon. Jisok fired once and dropped him. The third turned to run and found 2 more human soldiers blocking the corridor behind him. It was over before anyone raised their voice. Station security arrived minutes later. The Korath operatives were taken into custody. An official from the station's administration asked Jisok to explain what had happened, and he did so in short, clear sentences. When the official asked if the level of force was necessary, Jisok looked at him with flat, steady eyes. "She is our ambassador," he said. "That is all the law I need." The assassination attempt changed things. Not because it was surprising. Everyone on the human team had expected something like it. But because it was public. The station's neutral status had been violated by Korath agents, and the Concord could not ignore that. Dren Aska denied all involvement, but the damage was done. The species that had been sympathetic to the Korath position now looked at them differently. The moral high ground Aska had been standing on had cracked beneath his feet. That night, Loth Vayon requested a private meeting with Hana. They met in a small room near the top of the station, a place with no windows, but a single screen that showed the dead star outside. Vayon stood in the center of the room, tall and still, compound eyes reflecting the faint light. "I am going to tell you something," Vayon said, "that is not part of the official record. I tell you this not as the High Arbiter, but as a person who has served this institution for a very long time, and has grown tired of certain lies." Hana waited. "The ULSC was not created to protect lives," Vayon said. "It was created to protect power. The first species to travel the stars, my people among them, wrote those laws to ensure that warfare would always favor the larger fleet. Open formations, declared positions, no deception, no autonomous weapons. These rules guarantee that the species with the most ships will always win. That is not justice, it is arithmetic." Hana felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had suspected this. Taesun had theorized it. But hearing it confirmed by the highest legal authority in the galaxy was different. "For 10,000 years, Vayon continued, the ULSC has kept the powerful in power and the weak in their place. Small species fight, lose, and accept it because they believe the rules are fair. They are not fair. They were never fair." "Then why tell me this?" Hana asked. Vayon was quiet for a moment. "Because your species has done something no one else has done. You have exposed the lie. Not with words, but with results. You won a war you should have lost, and you did it by refusing to play a game that was designed for you to lose. The galaxy is watching. Many of them are starting to ask questions they have never asked before. But I must warn you. The powerful species will not let this stand. If the Concord acquits Earth, it will be the beginning of the end for the system that has kept them dominant. They will fight this with everything they have." Hana nodded slowly. "And what will you do?" "I will do what an arbiter should do," Vayon said. "I will follow the truth wherever it leads, even if it leads somewhere uncomfortable." After Vayon left, Hana sat alone in the room for a long time. Then she went to find Taesun. She found him on an observation deck, sitting with Doyu. The 2 old men were drinking tea from a thermos that Taesun had brought from Earth, and they were talking quietly. She told them what Vayon had said. Taesun nodded as if none of it was new to him. "Power writes the rules," he said. "It has always been this way. On Earth we had our own version. Armies that followed codes of honor that just happened to favor the army with the most knights, the most cannons, The most ships. He set down his tea. Millions of our people died because someone decided that walking in a straight line toward the enemy was more honorable than finding a better way. Doyu looked at him. And then we learned. Yes, Taesun said. We learned. It took us centuries and oceans of blood, but we learned that honor means nothing to the dead. That the only moral war is a short one. That the best tactic is the one that brings the most people home alive. He looked at Hana. That is what we are offering the galaxy. Not our weapons, not our ships. Our scars. The wisdom we bought with our own suffering. Hana sat down between them. Outside the window, ships from 100 different worlds moved slowly past the station. Each one carried beings who had fought wars under rules they had never questioned. Until now. Tomorrow is the final session, she said. Doyu finished his tea and set the cup down. Then we had better be ready. Somewhere on the station, smaller species were reading the Terran doctrine and seeing their own futures in it. Somewhere else, powerful empires were planning how to stop what was coming. And in a quiet observation deck, 3 humans from a small planet sat together and prepared to change the way the galaxy thought about war. The Grand Tribunal chamber felt different on the final day. The air was heavier, charged with the kind of tension that comes when everyone in a room knows that whatever happens next will matter for a very long time. Every seat was filled. Species that had not attended any of the previous sessions were now crowded into the upper tiers, standing in the aisles, watching from doorways. The dead star outside the station's windows cast no light, but inside the chamber, every eye was bright. Loth Vaeon took the arbiter's seat and called the session to order. The clicking voice was steady, but Hana noticed that Vaeon's long limbs were held very still, the way they got when the arbiter was concentrating hard on something important. This tribunal will now hear closing arguments, Vaeon said. The Korath Dominion will speak first. Dren Asuka rose. The rage that had fueled his earlier speeches had been replaced by something more controlled, and Hana thought, more honest. He walked to the center of the chamber floor and spoke without a datapad. He did not need one. He knew what he wanted to say. I am a soldier, Asuka began. I have fought 17 wars under the laws of the Concord. I have lost friends, ships, and parts of my own body in those wars. I have done all of this because I believed in the system. I believed that the rules existed for a reason, that they prevented the kind of total, unrestricted destruction that would consume us all if every species simply fought however it wanted. He paused and looked around the chamber. The humans say their way is better. They say their way saves lives. Maybe that is true for one war, but what happens when every species adopts their methods? What happens when there are no rules at all? When every fleet hides, deceives, strikes from the shadows, and sends machines to do its killing? I will tell you what happens. Trust dies. Communication dies. The ability to negotiate, to signal, to surrender, all of it dies. And when those things die, wars do not get shorter. They get infinite. It was a good argument. Hana could see it landing with the older, more established delegations. They nodded. They understood this fear because they had lived inside the system Asuka was defending for thousands of years. The system was imperfect, yes, but it was known. It was stable, and stability for species that had survived this long was more valuable than almost anything. Asuka finished and sat down. The chamber was quiet. Vaeon turned to the human delegation. Earth may now present its closing argument. Hana stood. She felt the weight of every eye in the room. She felt Doyu's calm confidence behind her, Taesun's quiet faith, and Jisuk's watchful presence by the door. She carried no datapad this time either. She walked to the speaking platform and stood there for a moment, looking at the chamber. Then she began. Admiral Asuka is right about one thing, she said. Rules matter. Without them, war becomes something that swallows everything and everyone. Humanity knows this better than most. We have a long and terrible history of wars fought without limits, wars where entire cities burned, where weapons were created that could end all life on our world, where the line between soldier and civilian was erased so completely that millions of innocent people were destroyed. She let that sit. She wanted them to understand that humans were not naive. They were not children who had stumbled into space with no understanding of what violence could do. We wrote the Terran doctrine of armed conflict, not because we do not believe in rules, she continued. We wrote it because we believe in better rules. Rules that serve the living instead of the powerful. Rules that measure success not by how beautifully a war is fought, but by how quickly it ends and how many people walk away from it. She took a breath. But I did not come here today to ask you to abandon your laws and adopt ours. That would be just as arrogant as demanding that we follow yours. This surprised the chamber. She could see it in the shifting bodies, the turning heads. What I am proposing, Hana said, is something new. Not the ULSC, not the Terran doctrine. Something that belongs to all of us. She projected a short document onto the central screen. It was not long, barely 2 pages, written in language so simple that any species could understand it. This is a draft framework for what we are calling the Galactic Compact of Conflict, she said. It establishes a set of universal principles that every species would agree to follow, regardless of their individual combat doctrines. These principles are simple. Protection of civilians is absolute. Genocide is forbidden under all circumstances. The right to surrender must always be honored. Prisoners must be treated with basic dignity, and the use of weapons designed to cause unnecessary suffering is prohibited. She looked at the chamber. Beyond these universal principles, each signatory species would maintain the right to fight according to its own doctrine. The Korath may continue to fight in open formations if they believe that is just. Humanity will continue to fight in the way that saves the most lives. Other species will find their own paths. But all of us, every single one, would be bound by the core principles. The things that make us civilized are not how we fight. They are who we protect. She stepped back from the platform. You asked us to follow your laws, she said. We respect them, but we will not kneel to rules that were written to make sure we lose. We offer something better. A law that every species writes together. Not for honor, not for tradition, for survival. She returned to her seat. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the deliberation began. Vion called for each delegation to register its position. It was not a simple vote. Each species could speak, argue, question, and challenge. The process took hours. The powerful species resisted. The Vishari argued that allowing multiple combat doctrines would create chaos. The Torvan warned that the Compact's universal principles were too vague to enforce. The Korath, through Asuka, maintained that Earth should be punished regardless of any future reforms. But the smaller species spoke too. One by one, delegations that had been silent for centuries stood and said things that had been unsaid for too long. A representative from a species called the Lunari, small beings with soft voices, who had lost 3 wars in 200 years under ULSC rules, said simply, "We have followed the laws. We have always followed the laws, and we have always lost. If following the law means dying, then the law is broken." Others echoed this. Species that had been too afraid to challenge the system now found their voices, because a strange, young, reckless species from a small blue planet had stood up first. When the final count came, it was narrow. Closer than Hana had hoped, but enough. The Galactic Concord voted to acquit Earth of all charges, and it voted to open formal negotiations on the Galactic Compact of Conflict, with Earth and 12 other species forming the initial drafting committee. Dren Oska stood and walked out of the chamber without a word. His heavy footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet. But Hana noticed something that she thought might matter more than anything else that had happened that day. 3 junior Korath officers who had come with Oska did not follow him out. They stayed in their seats, watching, thinking. One of them was taking notes. The chamber slowly emptied. Species that had never spoken to each other before were now talking in small groups in the corridors. The conversations were awkward and uncertain, but they were happening, and that was the point. Hana found Sayla Finn waiting near the exit. The Pilari observer had the ghost of a smile on her silver face. "You are not the Dreth," Finn said. "No," Hana agreed. "We are not." Later that evening, the human delegation gathered on the observation deck of the Steady Flame before departure. Shin Nari, the combat engineer who had designed the drone systems that had helped win the war, had joined them on the station for the final session. She sat next to Jisok by the window, both of them looking out at the stars. "Do you think it will actually work?" Nari asked. "The compact. Do you think the galaxy will really change?" Jisok thought about it for a while. "I do not know," he said, "but someone asked why the rules existed. That is the first step. Nobody changes anything until someone asks why." Nari nodded slowly and said nothing more. They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 soldiers who had fought a war the galaxy called illegal, and who were now watching that same galaxy try to figure out if maybe, just maybe, the humans had been right all along. At the front of the ship, Han Do-yu stood at the viewport as the docking clamps released, and the Steady Flame began to pull away from Aethys Prime. The massive station grew smaller behind them, its ancient metal catching no light from the dead star it circled. Taesun came to stand beside him. "A good day," the old man said. "A beginning," Do-yu corrected. "Beginnings are the hardest part. The rest is just persistence." Do-yu almost smiled. Almost. He watched the stars ahead of them, the long road back to a small blue planet that had just changed the rules of a galaxy it had barely joined. "They wanted us to fight like them," Do-yu said to no one in particular. "We chose to fight like us, and now they are wondering if maybe they should too." The Steady Flame turned toward home, and the stars stretched into lines of light. And behind them, the galaxy was already different than it had been before. Not because humans were stronger, not because they were smarter, but because they had been broken once, long ago, by their own wars, their own cruelty, their own blindness, and they had put themselves back together with a simple, stubborn belief that the only good rule is the one that keeps people alive. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything.